everyone. Welcome back to Day to Day Dev. I am Keith Franks of Cutlass Board Games, and with me, as always, is Steve Dee of Tin Star Games.
Hey guys.
And we thought this episode we would go over how to get started on something, like starting from a blank page on a project. Elise and I actually did something similar to this. We did like a pseudo game jam the other day where it was
Great.
kind of like throw out a whole bunch of ideas and try and make something. And I think we, in total, 4 hours, maybe a little bit less. Um, it did literally from concepts to a PDF that you can download and play as a game now,
Amazing.
um, which is kind of crazy. But I think this is a similar concept to kind of what we wanted to cover today. Steve kind of pitched it. This is, I guess, my interpretation of the question. Did you want to kind of elaborate on what you had in mind?
Yeah, look, definitely looking at how to do things quickly and how to do the first steps. Um, Last time we also talked about what happens when things go wrong, and it's also good to sort of, I think often things go wrong near the start. So, yeah, I mean, I do the same sort of thing with role playing games. We try to do, and I've done game teaching events where we're in 2 or 3 hours, people make a game, and that can be a really good exercise to just kickstart your design muscles, but also to get you over the fear of censoring yourself.
Which I've
Um,
done, by the way. Like I went to Steve's, I say course. I don't know. I can't think of like the exact words now down what it
Event,
was, but
yeah, it's
I went and did it. I'm like, a, I'd say a professional in the field, and I went to this event which was aimed at people who had never done this before, and it was really good. I personally went because I wanted to be doing the same thing, but I thought it was really interesting. We had a theme. We did literally start with nothing.
yeah,
Steve dumped a whole bunch of art supplies on the table, and he's like, "Today we're going to be building something cool." And I think it was really, I don't know, I was really proud of the product that I came out with. The other people that I saw doing stuff seemed to come out with some cool ideas.
yeah.
I think that those kind of exercises are like helpful. I feel like as a musician, right, the thing that you bring is your skill at the instrument that you play, or the
Mm,
as a composer, your knowledge of music theory. As a game designer, it's the same kind of thing. You're like practicing game theory actively, or flexing your wealth of knowledge of different mechanics and the combinations and strategies for these kinds of things.
yeah,
I think that's all important.
yeah. We've had a lot of professional designers come in and have a stab at it to stretch their muscles. Although it's always good. I mean, when we say professional designer, I think of that as anyone who's had a game published.
Hmm.
So that is also a wide category. We had Martin Wallace come in. He didn't actually do it, but he was there as a judge and a feedback person. So that was really great for that event. And he was going around and just playing everyone's game. So yeah, and a lot of people just do it, yeah, as a way to try something new, stretch their muscles, figure out what they're good at and what they're not good at. That's a lot. You can learn a lot when you're doing things under pressure, but you can learn a lot when you do any sort of project. And sometimes that's how I approach a game. Like, um, if I'm coming to a game, sometimes I'll be like, well, I've never made a game like this before. So I'm sort of working on an abstract game at the moment. I might give it a theme, but one of the things that was exciting about it is like, I've never made an abstract game before. I've never made that kind of game. I also, last week, had an idea for a strategy game, and I've never made anything really that complex before. So I don't know if I'm going to publish it, but what I'd like to do is to really have a crack at making something that's a bit more complex and tactical and longer. Like most of my games are shorter, simpler party games. Even when there is a bit more of a rules element, they're still simpler things. So yeah, it's good sometimes to just take off that pressure of, oh, I really want to get published, which is a really, it's important. It's not nothing to crave that kind of legitimacy, but it's also good to just be go, well, what am I going to learn on this project? What am I going to discover about myself or my skills?
Because you might
Yeah,
find
just
that you just fit into a niche. Because, like you just said there, that a lot of
yeah,
the games that you tend to make are smaller party games, and I've done a lot of the same thing. Some of
yeah,
the reason why I've done some of the same thing is that I don't have a lot of money to go into developing bigger
yeah,
games.
yeah,
And so I feel like we maybe have that in common where we're trending to less riskier projects.
yeah,
But that doesn't mean that building a shitty looking prototype of a really big game isn't valuable because you can you prove that you can do it if the opportunity for something came up in the future. Like, well, I actually do have ideas about this. I do actually understand how these things function, which I
mm,
think still has a lot of value. And being able to turn those big games into smaller games is also because there's certainly people
yeah,
that play small games that look at people playing big games, and I don't have the patience. If something goes longer than an hour, I'm grumpy. I don't like these types of players, but I want that type of experience in something smaller, like wingspan in 10 minutes or whatever.
mm.
Um, then that's a specific market that you could deliver on something, and I think that there's still a skill base worth looking at. But what do you think is the best way to get started?
I mean, there's two. The almost every game I've designed has started with writing things down on a piece of paper,
Mhm.
um, or whether that's with my keyboard or my pen. And I usually start with a bunch of sort of random ideas, so it's randomly brainstorming. And other designers have also said this. It's not about. It's usually not setting or mechanics. It's usually some sort of experience, or it's a hook or something.
Hmm. Like
Um,
a pitch,
so
like the way that
yeah,
stand-up comedians or like SNL writers will pitch a skit. It'll be like this thing that doesn't belong here in this scenario equals comedy, which
yeah,
could be like this game that exists with this new mechanic or new twist equals product.
yeah, yeah. So this game that I designed was one of the pretty much the very first game that I sort of designed all the way through. As you can see, I ran out of blue card while I was making it, but those are all actually the same types of cards. My sister and I were watching the film Primary Colors, which is about the Bill Clinton's election, and we were just enjoying the fact that there's sort of this element in that movie about neither side wants to be the first one to um, go negative and be critical because everyone's got secrets in their closet and are trying to hide things. Basically, you've got in that film, you've got Clinton trying to hide all the affairs and all the babies he's got with all the women that Hillary's not supposed to know about. But their other opponent has been sleeping with his, rent boys in his retirement home. Um, and we was we just, my sister just was like, oh, that should be a game where you're trying to play good at things that you're good at, but you don't want to be the first person to attack other people because then you lose points. But once you do get attacked, you can attack back. And um, she wasn't a game designer. I wasn't really a game designer of those kinds. I was making RPGs, and I was like, oh, that's actually a really good idea. So we actually then we just wrote a few emails to each other, like, oh, you could have this and you could have that. And then the next day, I just sat down and went, okay, well, we might have these cards and that cards. Um, Basically, yeah, there's just a couple of cards in here. There's a bunch of cards that are platforms that you can put out about how you're a good person or how you have good policies, how you have a good haircut, and then there's attacks that you can play on other people. So it's basically a very simple take back game. And yeah, I mean that is the other second. The second step is that big jump from we've written a lot of ideas down. Now we better make something,
Hmm.
and I think that's also really critical because I think when we talked about that last time, um, speedily making a prototype is gonna stop you being stuck in a. If I do that, it could suck.
Well, playtesting
Um,
helps you see what belongs there and what doesn't belong there in a
yeah,
way
yeah,
that writing something down on a sheet of paper can't do.
that's right, that's right, and it uses a different part of your brain.
And also, you
Um,
can see what's missing as well. Because you
yeah,
could go, oh, I've got rock and scissors. You know what I
yeah.
need?
Um, Before you do that, though, one thing that I often tell people to do is to try to start writing out the rules. Even if you don't have all the rules, like how would you start the rule book, right? That's something that I often get people to do when I'm doing these short jams as well. Like, what would be the first paragraph about the setting? What would be on the cover? And then, okay, how many players would it be? And
Mm.
then what might be in the game? Right. Because if you start figuring out, okay, we need this many players, it's going to go for this long. Okay, so how many turns is that? If each turn is 5 minutes and we want an hour game and there's four players, that's 60 minutes. That's 12 turns each. That's not right. That's 12 turns. That's 12 turns in an hour, which
Yeah,
means
that's
with four players,
four
that's three
turns
turns.
each, or three
That's
turns
only
each.
three
Sorry.
turns each.
Yeah.
So maybe the turns have to be shorter than that. Like 5 minutes, that's
Mm.
actually quite a long time for a turn.
Mm.
If each round is 5 minutes, then you have 12 rounds. So everyone's getting 12 actions. And again, okay, if I only get 12 actions, what can I do with an action? And then you also got your list of what do I need to go and get from my cupboard, right? I'm imagining 60 cards, a board. Okay, I need to go get some cardboard. I need to make, um, you know, 60 cards. Okay, I'll go and get some cards or I'll cut up some paper. Um, and then you think about things like, oh, okay, how many players are there? Four players. Okay, each player's going to need how many markers? A scoring marker. Are there any markers on the track? And then you just start getting pieces out, and you're actually really, prototyping makes it sound like you're designing something on a board, on your screen, and printing it
Mm.
out and sleeving and making. But a lot of this can just be going, okay, I'll use this. I'll get these coins out of that my dad used to collect from Canada. They'll be the pieces, and I'll get these old Pokemon cards and I'll scribble over them, but I'll just keep and that just putting them out and going, that's the cards, that can be the board, and it's forming it up in your mind as a physical concept.
Mm.
Getting out the highlighters and going, okay, one player is pink, one player is blue. I'll write a little card for them. Um, there was a game I tried to design for a very long time called. It was going to be called something like Starship Down or Starship Crash. It was a bit like Nemesis. So the ship had crashed. You were exploring the ship. You were trying to, uh, you know, find technology, flip over tiles, basically. But there was also this mechanic where you could do more on your action by sacrificing cards, which is basically your oxygen level. So you had to find your way off the ship before you ran out of air. And I wrote a bunch of background for it. I made up like 20 different characters with different stats and different powers. And then the core mechanic kind of fell apart, but I learned a lot by making up all those characters,
Mm.
and I learned how to find art for them. Like, so I was like, oh, okay, this character's an alien, so okay, I'll figure out how to get I'll think of a movie with an alien, get that picture, put it in, write some stats, write a little bit of write a funny name, and then maybe the first play test we were like, okay, that doesn't work, and I don't know what to do next, but I still learned something.
Well, also seeing what worked and what didn't work illuminates what your skills are good at in certain things, right?
Yeah,
So
yeah,
if you go, oh, I made a game that has 20 characters in it and only ever four are seen at a time. Maybe I have a really good skill in creating characters
yeah,
or building backstories or like writing and this kind of stuff, which I think is really interesting. What's funny to me is that what you described as the way that you go from concept to very first prototype is really really different to what I do.
yeah, yeah. No,
Um, so
that's and
my
that's a good point in general. That this is just how I do it, and
hmm,
everyone's different. Yeah,
I think having the tools to enable your style or finding out what your style is really good. So I have done a few like that where I just have like a pile of things and I go, oh, hang on, this will work like this. But I find that for me, the two main tools that work really really well is having Photoshop open
hmm,
with a single card, and I'll build the
yeah,
layout for the single card, and I'll just put all the information into that thing. Because pretty much every game that I've made has a lot of cards in it.
yeah,
Murders are towards Manager, the first one, that's like centralized around a board, and the cards are just for you to remember shit. That's like really it. And even then, that's like a lot of that design was like, okay, I'm gonna draw out the board, and then everything else is like directly in Photoshop. But I also feel like I write my rule books the exact same way every time. I
hmm,
will kind of break down my sections. I'll go, okay, the very, very first thing is going to be how many players in it, how long is it going to take?
yeah,
And then I'll go, okay, what does this setup look like? Sorry, what does the list of components look like? And then what does this setup look like? So I go,
Yep.
okay, list of components. I probably don't know, but maybe I have some ideas because you might start off with I want to have a lot of dice in this game or something like that, and I'll
Yep.
put that in there.
Yep.
And as I'm adding more things to the game, I'm writing it down in the components list. And the components list won't just be like 40 cards, it'll be like 10 red cards that do this, or 10 blue cards that do this. So you're splitting up in all as many different categories as possible, which gives you
Yep.
like a development to do list because you're like, okay, these are all the different cards I need to make. Then I'll do like setup. What does it look like on the table? And then I kind of just procedurally go through writing the rulebook. But before any of this
Yep.
happens, above that is a section where it's just single lines of text that are ideas. Like
Yeah.
on the
Yeah.
projects I'm working on at
Brainstorm.
the moment is like, because I'm doing some playtesting, and I've been changing things, and I will just be throwing up lines of text, which is like, okay, I need to change this thing, or like, this particular part of scoring only works in this circumstance, or whatever. Like, just shit that is not specific to a particular section, but is something that you need to know, and I need to find out where to put it in the rule books later or whatever. But it's just here's a piece of information for me to know. And I think
Hmm.
just starting budgeting everything like that, and then sorting it into a relevant place later is probably just a
Yep.
really good way to start. Like the just put it all in the Google Doc,
Yep. Yep.
save it to your phone, write it down somewhere, something like that, so it's accessible.
Yeah. I
Build
mean, that's
something that lets you look at it, play
things like Google
test.
Docs and notes and stuff. Like you can do, if your thumbs are good, you can do this stuff on your phone. Like
Mm.
the idea I've had for this strategy game, I started just by writing things on my phone. I often start with an email as well. Like a lot of my games are literally start with me emailing a friend, like, "What about a game like this?" And then we have a conversation, and then I'll like clip it and put it into a Google Doc.
Mm.
And yeah, that becomes as like the top of it is the brainstorming. It's one sentences. It's like, I want this, I want this, and then you start to below that you might be able to go, okay, here's how to break down the rules. Here's how many pieces I'll need. Yeah, and you're like listing in those dot points things like it's there's some basic stuff like how many players and how many
Mm.
cards, but also things like I want this to be, I'm inspired by this, and this game. I often make a list like that. Like, so the game I'm trying to think about at the moment is partly inspired by the new board game, which is called Hegemony,
Oh
or
yeah,
Hegemony,
yeah.
and
I have
it's
no
really
idea how
interesting
it's
because,
pronounced.
yeah, it's very asymmetrical. And I was basically thinking, okay, I like that idea. I like that idea where people are doing different goals.
Mm.
Um, and I thought it might be interesting to approach that. It's sort of about modern politics. I was thinking, what if it was more about ancient civilizations, and on a larger scale in that sense. So that's my first idea. Like, what if it was hegemony, but it was like crossed with civilization? And so I write that down, and then I go, okay, well, what does that mean? Who are the four players? How's the asymmetry work? And then I send it off. Like I said, look, again, went to an email. I sent to a few of my friends, like, have a look at this. See if you've got any ideas in your head. Write
Mm.
them in the document.
It
Um,
sounds more like the Netflix writers' room than average bedroom game
yeah,
producer.
I mean, some people just concentrate on themselves.
Mm.
Um, but I like to talk things out. I like
Mm.
to sort of, and look, only one person's posted anything in reply, but it's a bit like playtest prototyping in that sense. If I write it down and show it to someone, then I've at least made it real, you know.
Mm.
And for some people that can be a little bit of accountability. Um, it can be a little bit of momentum. And it's just sometimes like if nobody writes back, this is the dumbest thing I've ever heard of. It's probably not the dumbest thing in the world. So, and if someone writes back, hey, that's cool, then you're like,
Yeah.
oh,
It
okay,
gives you an interesting burst of motivation to help you work
yeah,
on the
you
project
can.
as well.
It's a sort of a way of playtesting without actually getting the prototype ready. Like
Yeah,
if you're
sanity
explaining to
testing.
someone, yeah, that's right. If you haven't got your prototype, so you can still go to a design event and go, look, I haven't built it yet, but here's my idea.
Here's my
And then
pitch. Mm.
yeah, and people can go, oh, that's really interesting. And they might say, oh, have you seen Game X? Because it's
Mm.
vaguely in that area, which isn't, it's not copying you, still make your game, but go and look at that. Or I play that because I really,
This
you,
touchstone works for me. I think
yeah,
there's
like I
also like
really,
another bit of I have this idea, but I can't build a prototype because of these reasons, right?
Yeah,
And but
yeah,
then if you're still communicating that pitch to people, they can be like, "Oh, this problem you have has already been solved by this other thing," or
yeah,
"Have you
yeah.
considered this?" Or here's an example. Like, there's just a huge wealth of knowledge in sharing this with other people that can help you get to that first step, even.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. So I'll often, and you can do that on social media as well.
Mm.
I'll just start a thread about like when I was like, so I've got
Game
this
in a
massive.
tweet.
Yeah, I do games in a tweet, but also I do things like when I was first building Relics, the Angel RPG. I was like, tell me your favorite movie about angels, and then I went and watched them all, and I was like,
Mm.
tell me if you were going to make an angel, what would you be the angel of? And I went through the game and wrote all that down. I'm like, okay, so these are the things we need to cover. What kind of things do you? And that was, and then I would like go, what do you think about this idea? And just testing bits of the setting. Now that's easier with RPGs because it's very much based on ideas, but it's the same sort of thing of you can do a little bit of that with board games as well. You can go, okay,
Mm.
if you were playing a game and you had this card, what do you think it does? You can just draw it up on a simple plain thing and go, or is this iconography clear? Or
Yeah.
do you see what you're supposed to do with this card based on these boards? Which of these things seems better? And that kind of thing.
I think what we've said in many, many words is, I guess the first step is to develop a touchstone.
Yep. Yeah.
And the touchstone is something that helps give life to what this thing is to you.
Yeah.
Like, for example, writers, when writing novels, sometimes will base the likeness of a character off an existing person, so that if that character is faced with a conundrum, they go, okay, what would this actual person do? Or,
Yeah.
like, what kind of traits does this person have? Like, for example, in my writing of Winning Love by Daylight, I have one character whose touchstone is anxious about every single thing. And so
Yeah.
whenever they encounter something, they're like, I'm anxious about this. And in like the examples that you gave, emailing that to someone makes it
Yeah.
real because they go, that is a cool idea that you have, and you've made this thing exist in their mind now, right?
Mm.
Writing down a rule book is the same as a recipe existing for a cake. You might not
Yeah.
have baked the cake, but if the recipe exists, that means that this type of cake, even though it's a concept, is a real thing, right?
Yep.
And
Yep.
I think for each person, there's probably a different method, but finding what gets you that touchstone, like the ephemeral thing of what your concept of the game is, and parts might change or whatever, but getting that feeling of what this thing is going to be is a good first step because you
Mm.
kind of see where your goalposts kind of lie. You can see the scope of the projects kind of early on. I think is really important as well.
Yeah.
And sometimes it'll lay down the footpath for what you have to do for some of these things, where it's
Yep.
going to go, what the prototype's going to look like. A lot of times I'll have like a bonkers concept of something and go, okay, the scope's too big, it's too hard, or this will cost too much money to produce, I'm not going to do it. Or
Yep.
I know I don't have a skill for this thing, or this
Yeah.
is not really in my wheelhouse. Maybe I just make this as a meme. Like I made Letter Drop, which is just, it was a pitch. Like the whole thing was a joke I delivered to my partner at the time where I was like, haha, what if Connect 4, but we played it with Scrabble tiles? And I was like, well, just hang on. Why don't we just do that? And I think even some of that is like fine. Where if the joke is, what if this thing existed, this existing game, um, twist on your expectations, delivered in a new way. This is now a whole different product.
Yeah. And
Um,
that's how look that's how musicians create songs. They sit around and they jam, they riff, and they often make jokes like, "What if I made this note?" And they go, "Okay, hang on, that was actually pretty good."
yeah. What if I play it
Um,
with a fork, or what if I
yeah,
plug it into the,
yeah.
yeah,
And that's also a really good way to get started. We've talked about this before, but like, if you like a game but you want to change something about it, or there's something you can see that you might change about it,
yeah.
that's a really good way to start. And you don't have to start from scratch. We talked about the empty
Well,
page,
you
but
could
if
just
you're,
buy that game,
yep,
like, and pull out, like, physically remove the things that you don't like,
yeah,
scribble on it, or fucking whatever. Like, it depends on the type of the game, and
I mean,
physically alter it in the direction of whatever you want to make the
yeah,
prototype. Like I've bought games just to pull them apart.
yeah, yeah. If you yeah, and I just think you just think of small things you can change. Like say you really don't like Monopoly because it goes too long. Well,
uh,
how would you make it shorter? You know,
mm,
you nobody likes the orange category in Trivial Pursuit, right? So that category is now charades.
Gone.
You know,
Yeah,
or something like
literally
that.
remove the cards from the
Yeah,
box and find a new
um,
thing to replace. I think that's isn't that like
yeah,
how Cranium came around, where it's
yeah.
like
I think so. They've
Cranium is literally Trivial Pursuit, but they've added Play-Doh, a sand timer.
and
I think
charades
that's
and
it,
something. Yeah,
something like
yeah,
this. And it's
yeah,
like when you see that logical progression of existing thing to new concept, you go, well, "That's not that hard. I could
yeah,
probably do that."
yeah, yeah. And so many games start like that, and
I'd say most of
um,
them. I'd say
yeah,
there's no like if a game came out and it was 100% beyond the scope of the things that we have experienced so far, it would fail as a product.
yeah,
Every
yeah,
game is at least 40% the same as something else that exists already in some way. Like,
yeah, yeah.
um,
And that's what we said last time. Is that's a part of what sells. People like that. They're like, oh, I really, you know,
yeah.
I like Pictionary, but I'd love to do it with, with Chinese whispers or where I can only use my left hand or whatever it is. You know, I like Cards Against Humanity, but I want a different sort of card or something.
Yeah,
I like
cards
playing.
against
Yeah.
humanity, but everyone plays from a place of empathy and is trying to make each other feel better about themselves.
Mm, yeah. That is a great concept.
I actually
Cards
joked
towards
around
humanity.
this. I remember
Yeah.
after PAX, we went to the pub. There was a bunch of us, and we'd
Mm,
like just kind of jokingly penned the idea of Cards Against Humanity. But the goal is instead of making the funniest combination, is you're trying to put together the greatest compliment for a specific person, and
that's
the like
great.
the
Yeah.
person that wins the round is like the most accurate or most genuine or like most applicable because you probably just have like a pile of junk that you're trying to put together into a thing.
Yeah.
Like the compliment and the idea is to just gas up your friends. Like it's like just
Yeah. That's
genuinely anti Cards Against Humanity.
that's brilliant. That's
But like
brilliant.
that's a
Like we can
game,
we
right?
can make that now. Yeah.
And that was a
Um.
joke. That was a pitch we kind of goofed around with. I don't know if we'll ever make it. It was just kind of a lark at the
Yeah.
time. But that's seeing something that exists, finding a way to put a spin on it, and then now you
Yeah.
have a product that exists. You know what the target user base looks like because the product exists already, and then you're trying to make a thing. I don't know. And it's like
Yeah.
already really far all the way down the production line in just 30 seconds of thinking about something. But that's
That's
because
right.
I've flexed that muscle many times. I have to look that far ahead and go, okay, look, I'm already working on something this year. Is this something I can commit to for a whole next year or whatever, right?
Mm, yeah. Yeah. You're looking at a year or two in a production pipeline, and you've also got to do pre-production. You've got to do post-production.
Mm.
So and in that sense, it's good to have a cupboard full of games that are half designed, or that are ideas waiting to be designed.
Mm.
You don't want to have too many things that you never come back to. So I think Phil Walker Harding, who I met a couple of years ago, had a great piece of advice: is that whenever you stop working on a game, write down where it is and where it's going, and if
Mm-hmm.
anything is stuck about it, so that you can come back to it. Because I have too many games that I've just wandered away from because something was I was busy on doing something else, or I was taking some game to market, or whatever it was, or I couldn't figure out how to solve something, and then I'll come back and go, shit, where was I?
Yeah, this was a
So I've had
banger,
to,
except
yeah,
I've forgotten everything about what I was doing just now.
yeah, yeah, and you
Yeah.
had a big rush, and you made some stuff, and you wrote some rules, or maybe you didn't. You wrote like, I'm often bad about writing rules down because it's all up in
Yeah.
here. And then you
I'm the
come back and go,
same.
what the fuck does this card mean? It's like +2 dragon, and you're like, okay, I had an idea.
Yeah.
Um,
Because I feel like
so
all of
yeah,
my touchstones will stay with me forever.
yeah,
But you might just forget about entire games until prompted by
yeah,
something. A lot of the time, because for me, it's like, here's an idea, and you're like, okay, and I already have a few of these rolling around or whatever. But then you go, okay, is this one good enough for me to spend 300 days working on it? And you're like, probably not. I'm like, okay, is this something that I can do in the short term that I think will take me in a new direction, will teach me something worthwhile, is content or whatever, like whatever reason I can justify spending the time on it, right? And then it's like, probably not. I'm like, okay, it's going to get forgotten about.
Mm.
But then if it does fall into some of these categories, I know what the end goal is for it. I know if I'm mobilizing artists on it right away or whatever, you know what I mean? Like
Yeah,
beginning
yeah.
development as soon as possible, making media about it as soon as possible. But that's because I'm career focused. I'm always thinking about my slate, always thinking about what the development is for this kind of stuff. What
Mm.
my time into money looks like all of the
Yep.
time. And I think that the average game designer who is maybe pitching doesn't have to worry about this stuff. If you're self publishing, probably for your first project, none of this shit matters. Honestly,
Mm.
just build a good product. Take it to wherever the hell you're gonna get it funded and sold, and then like that's really your goal. Because I feel like sometimes when I encounter people, especially like we have our pseudo incubator thing, Tabletop Tuesday, which is next week. People come and go, "This is my idea." I'm like, "That's fantastic," and they're like, "What do you think about it?" I'm like, "Here's all my advice. First of all, I come from an incredibly specific point of view where all of the advice that I give is about you being a career designer, most of which is not going to be very helpful to you because I'm coming from that particular place. Like, if you care about this
Yep.
game specifically and no other thing, then most of my advice isn't going to matter, right? And like all of these kind of problems. And sometimes I worry if I am coming back to doing that first game, first time thing. How fresh could it be? How different could I really be doing this? Am I biased or blinded by all of the things that I have learned in the future? Like, you know what I mean? Like,
Mm.
is anything ever going to be as good as Castles of Calera because I was just making a game? None of this other shit mattered. Like, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
And it's hard. I just think for your first thing, you're looking at the blank sheet of paper. I think having fun, because like looking like let's say you've been making games for 10 years now. Looking back on that first thing is still always going to be there,
Mm.
right? So you don't need to rush through that to get through to 3 or 4 games done and published. You don't need to have 100,000 ideas at once. You just need to be working on something, developing yourself, and building a prototype.
That's right. Yeah. And it might be like the only danger I think if you're the person who has that one game idea is that um, it might not be the game that is going to be published, and it might be
Mm,
the game that's teaching you how to make the game that's going to be published,
yeah, and if you
which
get
might be the
stalled on
third
that,
or the
you're
fourth or
stalled.
something.
Yeah,
Yeah,
which
and
is hard.
and whatever kind of designer you are, you shouldn't just stop at one. I think it's just it's too dangerous, and it's not going to stretch your muscles enough. It's great to have
Mm,
an idea and want to bring it. What I guess that's also the danger of Kickstarter and self-publishing these days is that
mm,
it can be pretty easy if you've got the money and the time to put into a Kickstarter campaign and get a couple of hundred people to buy your game. Um, and then you might go, oh, okay, well, I did it. Now what? And it is worth thinking about. Well, what happens after that? Um, and yeah, is this the game that I want to put all of that on?
mm.
Um, and there's lots of different ways to. I mean, I think we come back to this all the time. There's lots of different ways to be a game designer and to work in the game design industry.
Yeah,
I mean,
because
I
I
started.
think it's interesting to consider that, right? Because
Yeah,
let's look at we talk about Blood on the Clock Tower all the time, but I more and more get the hunch that Stephen Medway, the creator of Blood on the Clock Tower, is a hobby designer. He does it because
yeah,
he loves this one game in particular.
yep,
And to me, I'm like the way that they're running the business and the way that they've done Kickstarter and they've done this kind of stuff gives me the impression that they are career designers.
mm,
But how am I ever going to know that until they make the next thing? Like, what's
mm,
the next thing? Is Clock Tower just a live service game? They'll just release expansions for 10 years and live off that forever? Do they make a
yeah,
Clock Tower 2? Is there another game in
yeah,
the same category that they capitalize? Like, does the Pandemonium Institute just continue to exist and make more different things? But just because maybe the things that we're doing, all the suggestions and stuff that we have is career designer focused, where you're making like lots of things rather than focusing on one thing, doesn't mean that you can't be really successful in just being a hobby designer.
Yeah,
I
yeah.
think is also worth mentioning.
I mean, there are plenty of people who have thrown everything behind one particular game. So there's some Australian designers who made a game called That Sound Game. And again, back to what we were saying earlier, it's basically charades, but you can make noises. You
Mm.
can't say any words, and you can't use your hands, but you can make noises. And it's a very simple idea. They pumped a bunch of their own money into it. They did everything in their own house. They didn't get a distributor. They just printed it somewhere, shipped it into their lounge rooms, and they're just basically making a whole bunch of money out of it. They managed to basically make more money than they started with
Mm.
as their sales have gone up. They had a fair bit of capital to start with, and I was like, "Oh, okay, you guys going to publish any more party games?" But no, that's all we wanted to do. That's it, and they're making money,
It's kind
and
of
they might.
based though. It's like
Uh,
walking in, kill the room. I'm done here, undefeated, retiring.
yeah,
Like,
look, I mean, it's not how like I think for me, game designing is really part of who I am and part of my
mm,
life, and I can't stop thinking about it.
I'm the
But I'm not going
same.
to say to them, you did it, you did wrong.
Yeah.
That's not the way to do it. You're supposed to, be a much more serious game designer or something, or more do it longer or harder or whatever it is. Um, it's still an interesting game, and they found a way to make money out of it, and
Mm,
um, and they did it with a very professional attitude. So whatever whatever sort of format you're going for, there are different ways and different pathways. I mean, that is also what's particularly true nowadays is there's a lot more markets as well. There are so many different types of games. People are coming into games for all sorts of reasons, and that is wonderful because you can then make a game for just those people. There's somebody out there who wants a game that has 4 cards in it, or all the cards are made out of rocks, or yeah, we've seen this in computer games as well, right? Games that are just weird little games. You can play a game
mm,
like Dark Souls, which is huge and complex and really hard. Or you can play a game where you're watering plants on your windowsill, and somebody wants that. And you might never quite unlocking how to make X dollars from Y project is not always easy, but there are so many different pathways nowadays, and so many
mm.
different possibilities. Um, at the moment, I've done a bunch of self-publishing over the last couple of years, and I'm slowing down now. I've decided to go back to pitching again because I'm just a bit worn out from the Kickstarter cycle. Um,
Well,
I
yeah. So not only does Kickstarter take a lot out of you, but it takes a lot of time, and it's a
Yep,
lot of time where nothing is happening as well, where you're just
yep,
waiting on something. But the brain doesn't stop itching about different funky ideas. Like you're not
yep,
just not interacting with media or games or anything like
yep,
that. And you're
yep,
like, well, here's my next thing, but I can't do anything because I'm still in the Kickstarter cycle. I don't want to be juggling 2 or 3 of these at once. One is probably more than one human should really endure at a time.
yep,
Um,
yep,
and so yeah, it's definitely got to be hard. I've honestly taken this whole month off. I was just like,
yep,
my Kickstarter failed. I'm sad about it. I'm just gonna fucking play lots of Zelda. I bought myself Diablo 4. I was like, I'm just gonna play a
yep.
lot of fucking video games. And in doing that, I unlocked my third eye about working on my fucking Cutlass prototype, which is like the
Nice,
first game that I started working on.
nice.
Actually, I
Yep.
wanted to bring this up a little bit on the pod was because I encountered a really interesting circumstance in the playtesting for it. Basically, I printed out all the cards. It's like just imagine I invented Magic the Gathering, like that's what the game
Yep.
basically is. But I'm like, here is a pool of 164 cards that you need to make a 40 card deck out of.
Hmm.
And so we're playing stuff, and we encountered not only are we trying to balance deck building, but also balance what the different cards do, as well as balancing how the rulebook functions. And all of
Yep.
this is really hard. And basically, just for the deck building, I'm like, I just want to make the best, most busted thing that I can because that'll show me what the most broken things are, and I probably have to fix those things.
Yep.
Um, and then in playtesting, there was a whole bunch of stuff that didn't work as intended, or like was like way overpowered, or like whatever, trying to fix these things. But what I found really interesting was when I was trying to fix stuff, I go, okay, this doesn't function. Do I change this card, or do I change the entire rules of the game to facilitate it? And
Yep.
I know that
Yep.
that sounds like really grandiose, But one of the examples was so imagine Wingspan, how like you play a bird in a row and it activates everything in that row.
Yep. Yep.
Except that there's like several different colors and it will only activate stuff that shares a color with it. But like you could have
Mhm.
a whole rainbow in one row and that just means that they won't activate each other. Something like that, right? But one of the colors has really, really powerful things, but not very many cards in it. So it
Mhm.
will be very difficult to activate them more than once. So
Yep.
either I make like a really intensely powerful busted ability, or it's like not crazy, and then the game activates it every turn.
Yep.
So I'm like, do I want to enable it being activated by the player, and then it like the scale upon which it will be powerful is very different to like it's activated by the game, and then like it's exactly steady at how powerful something is.
Yep. Yep.
And then I'm like actively choosing what the variance is going to look like. And I thought this was really interesting because normally, in most of my playtesting of stuff, I'm like, card is broken, fix card.
Mm. But yeah, that's a really good point. Is that you sometimes have to make these choices, and there isn't a right answer.
mm.
This week I was sort of looking at the final. We actually ended up with three prototypes for the score with
Oh yeah, I saw
slightly
this
different
picture.
card finishes.
Mm.
Yeah, and we're like, which one is the best possible one, given that this versus this versus this, and there isn't a right answer, and that happens mechanically as well sometimes.
Mm.
Also this week, speaking of playtesting, I was at the board game barbecue event. Shout out to the
Mm.
board game barbecue guys. They're great guys. In Australia, they run a podcast called the Board Game Barbecue, but they also supplement that and help raise funds for the podcast by having game days. And it's borrow games from the library, play games all day, but also people bring prototypes. And it's also good because it's another sort of chain. So there's a game called Star Tycoon. It did really good
Mm.
on Kickstarter. Like it did its Kickstarter launch, and now another game company is looking at whether they want to take it on to their stable. But as part of that, they're actually developing it and tweaking some of the mechanics. So we were doing
Interesting.
really, really in-depth play testing where we were looking at every single card and not just whether it was broken or powered properly, but also do you want to take this? What happens when two people take a card like that?
Mm.
How does that affect the whole economy? And this game is going through so many different little tweaks to make sure that every time you play it, it's really engaging, that people can
Consistent.
understand what the cards mean, that you don't have that weird game. Because these days, if you know, if you pick up a game and have a bad first game, it can really be, you can get on Board Game Geek and say this game sucks and stuff. So
I
for that sort of,
misunderstood the rules, and
yeah,
therefore this game is a 0 out of 10.
yeah. So for a bigger publisher, some of those things are more sensitive, and that's just
mm.
also another example of the different pathways. Like you can make your one-off game, or whatever it is, or your first game, and self-publish it, and then if it's good enough, someone may come along and go, "We would like to
Get
pick that
poached.
up."
Yeah. So hang on, Star Tycoon.
And
I'm pretty sure that was on Kickstarter not that long ago.
no,
I'm
yeah,
pretty
it was.
confident I
It's.
remember seeing this on Kickstarter like 2 months
I
ago
think it.
maximum.
I think it's. Yeah, so it's probably just after the Kickstarter funded that the company started going, "That's interesting," and
No.
that's how it can go. Like, I've got some games that I've self-published, and I'm talking to companies about maybe they want to publish it. Like, I just put it on the
Mm.
Game Crafter, and um, like the best example of that is Sushi Go, right? Sushi Go was
Mm.
self-published by Phil Walker Harding, and he sold like 100, 200 copies, and then I can't remember who it was, but Asmodee or somebody was like, "That's really cool. We'll publish it on
Mm.
a larger scale." Um,
Well, I guess the other thing is that as a self publisher in Australia, how much reach could you really possibly have? If a company comes to you and says, I want to license this in Italy, you say
yep,
yes, because just
yeah,
how
absolutely,
fucking realistic is that you're printing this in any other language,
yep,
right?
yep. Even
I've had that a few times where people have been like, hey, I want to localize this to like specifically one country. I'm like, oh, well, I'm not personally printing out 1,000 copies of it for you, so we're going to have to work something out.
yeah,
And I think all these kinds of things are definitely interesting. Just having your thing exist out there, and like
yep.
even like just the GameCraft, the marketplace, like you said, is not
Mm.
nothing. Like
Nope.
it's proof that you've made it this far. Someone might see this and go, "It's a pitch, right? Like you're sending a
Yep.
pitch out into the void." They see this, they go, "This is insane. This is how is this here and not
Yep.
in Barnes
Yep.
and Noble or whatever, you know?" And they go, "Well, actually, maybe I'm the guy that's going to make that happen."
Yeah.
Um,
Absolutely.
it's the exact putting good energy out into the universe, but good
Hmm.
energy is fun games that you made.
Yep. Yep. I mean that, and that's yeah, important. That's what we talked about: fast prototyping and fast publishing, and publishing something
mm,
small. If you
mm.
can just make a game that, or
Build
even
a
half a game.
portfolio, right? Like if you
Yeah.
just
Yeah.
like imagine the parallel of being an illustrator. An
Yep.
illustrator isn't going to get hired to do a job unless if they have a portfolio. And if the
Yep.
portfolio is one image, it's a lot harder to convince someone about your range of skills or different styles that you can do than if that
Yep.
portfolio is 10, 15, 20 images. And if you as a
Yep.
designer, you go, here's my one game, it did just okay. And they're like, okay, it's one genre, it's one theme, it's one set of mechanics. And you go, well, here's 10 games that I made. 8 of them are probably dog shit. These 2 are pretty good. This one
Yep.
sold kind of well. I've kind of
Yep.
proved that I am one serious about this career, kind of know what I'm doing.
Mm.
you know,
This one was free. This one's still
yeah.
in a prototype, but it's nearly
This was
finished.
just for a YouTube video
Um,
that 300 people saw. Like
yeah.
it's
Yeah.
all relevant.
Um, I mean, that's last time when we had Tabletop Tuesdays, we had Elise bring along something that was just sort of, it was only 80% a game. It was more of a mechanic, but we were like,
Mm,
this is really unique. Nothing is like
mm.
this. And so that's sort of, if you can just sort of tie off the front end, you've got something in your portfolio, you know? And it's something you can also come back to if you need anything. It's in there in the box, with some labels on it, so you know why it stopped or where it stopped.
Yeah, what the
You know,
roadblock was, or even just really
um,
describing what the thing is.
yeah, what
Um,
it is and where it might go. So when you pick it up again, you don't have to do as much work getting it back up, and you can say like, didn't know how to sell this, or
yeah, didn't
pitched it
have
to,
enough money to produce this. Then you
yeah,
like that was exactly Murders at Seward's Manor for me. Didn't
yeah,
have enough money to produce this. I'm like, well, the game's done.
yeah,
I am just poor.
yeah. And then like 2 years later, you meet someone who's like, "Hey, I've got some money or something," or your
mm,
great uncle Hubert dies or something,
mm.
um,
R.I.P.
and
Hubie.
yeah, and he's like, "Here's 10 grand in my will," and you go, "Right, well, I know way back over there, I had something I couldn't afford to
Mm.
publish or whatever
Time
it
to
is."
invest in myself.
Yeah, I mean that was part of the reason we were able to actually promote the score so much was because
Hubert
my
died.
parents actually, yeah, my parents basically was like, we don't want you to wait too long for our inheritance. We're going to give you a
Oh,
bit of money now. So that was just like, oh, sweet, I can do a bigger advertising campaign, and that was a
that's
big
hype,
deal.
actually.
Yeah. So it wasn't a huge amount of money, but it was like, that means like it meant that it was money that we could afford to like, even if we spent it on an advertising campaign that didn't work, we would be
Yeah,
okay. And that's the thing. It's like we can take a risk.
extra
Whereas
safety net. Yeah, that's
if
actually
you
really
if you
huge.
yeah, if you're poor and it's like, if I spend this money, I need to get return on it.
Mm,
Um, and yeah, I also had people invest in when I did Baby Dragon Bedtime. I had people just give me a couple of hundred each,
okay.
just enough to run a print run, and I was able to pay them back within a couple of years with a ton of interest.
Mm.
And yeah, so when we talk about angel investors, people often think that's like, well, I want 10% and I'll give you $2 million. It's often just your friend who has, look, I have $500, or I have two
Look,
thousand
man, I
bucks,
had
which
a
is which
really
is
lucky day on the pokies, and I've been seeing
yeah.
how hard you've been grinding lately.
I believe in you.
yeah.
Here's a grand to get it to a printer or something or whatever it is.
Mm.
That's how some of these things get made. Or we talked about this before. Favors in kind. Someone's like, I know a printer. Or I work at a printer. I'll do your cards for you for your prototype. Or
Mm.
you
Because
know,
I know
I
you have this skill that I need for this other
yeah,
thing.
yeah. Or
Yeah.
whatever it is. I can find a cheaper way for you to do this. I you know I work in shipping, so I can make sure that the shipping is dirt cheap or something like that.
Mm. It brings
Yeah,
it
so
all
there's
back
people.
to why networking is so important.
That's right. That's right. And
Uh,
that's why you make things so that you can then go and go. Well, I'm here and I'm not just a
Here's my
spectator. I
business
made this little
card, a
thing.
board game.
Yeah. Yep.
Yeah.
Um, and yeah, I mean, and you belong at an event no matter what. But we want to see what you're making. Um,
Mm.
because it is your your making thing is your business card in many ways.
Honestly,
It's
if you're just building a really cool pitch, I am just as excited to see and hear about that
yep,
than
yep,
someone pulling out the 99% completed thing or pulling out 10 different cool ideas. Like,
yeah,
there's no. I just think a lot of the time you just your own enemy when it comes to getting into these kinds of things.
yeah,
And believing in yourself is really hard in the society that we live in, where it's
yep,
really easy to be invalidated. But I also think that you, like, among us, you're probably the coolest person that we met that day. Your
yeah,
idea is
yeah.
something we definitely didn't fucking think of, and your enthusiasm is really important, and like all this kind of stuff.
Yeah.
Like,
I
you
always,
are a game designer. If you're watching this podcast, I have ordained you a game
yep.
designer. I've
You are
cured your
officially part
imposter
of the industry.
syndrome.
Yep.
Yeah.
I mean, that's one of the reasons I actually love going to playtesting events. It's not so much for what I learn about my game or even for seeing the games. It's for seeing the people because they inspire me.
Mm.
I'll be
Mm.
there like, oh, I don't know if my game's very good, and they'll come up like, I don't know if my game's very good. I'm like, oh no, I can see what's really good about this. And
Yeah.
you brought this to me, and I feel like, oh yeah, okay, I see that you're really being brave and awesome. That makes me feel good about bringing my game next week. And seeing those people who come in and go, oh, this is a bit weak, or and then I remember one time at a dev con I met this woman who was like, she had this really interesting game about flying planes, and I was like,
I played that.
oh
It was great.
yeah,
Barnstormers.
it's yeah, it's a great game, and it was like, but I made some comment like, oh, I feel like you should maybe make it simpler so it's a bit easier for people to understand. Like maybe a first thing, and she was like, oh, that seems really hard, and I don't know how to do that. And then the next
Yeah.
morning, she walked up to me and she went, I fixed it just like you said, and
Yeah, that's
she
great.
had the eye over the tiger in her head. And I'm like, oh my god! And every time I think of getting stuck, I think of that woman and think of how much she
Yeah.
impressed me. That I can't remember her name anymore, but she was
Cheryl.
Cheryl. Yeah,
Yeah, I'm a big fan.
she
I'm kind of a
yeah.
Cheryl stan, honestly.
Yep. Cheryl, if you're listening to this, we want to see more of your games, and
Yeah,
you inspire me every
Barnstormers
day.
was really, really cool.
Um,
But like
yeah,
we wouldn't have this experience if this person wasn't bringing their random, cool, and incredibly specific idea to an
yep,
event that we happen to be at.
yeah,
Um, but
uh,
as we are nearing the end of our hour, we've got some really exciting news about the future of the podcast.
yep,
Because this is the last episode of Day to Day Dev. And the reason why this is the last episode of Day to Day Dev, at least in this fashion, is that it's evolving into something else.
yep,
You may have seen that we've name dropped Elise a few times. She is actually a really new game designer in the Sydney scene. And the three of us are going to be replacing this podcast with a new one. It's going to be filmed on location, the same place that we do Tabletop Tuesday. It's going to be all three of us, and I think because she is a lot newer in her journey, that a lot of the perspective and questions and things that she's going to be asking about is going to be really interesting and keep us on track, which will be
yep,
exciting. It's going to be called From Scratch to Shelf, and it's going to be just, I guess, hopefully the next evolution of what this has been. I've been really enjoying doing a podcast like this and talking about game design and building all these kind of things together. And the idea is to be able to take it to the next level, improve the content, bring, you know, more,
yep,
bring more for the people, which
yeah,
I'm really
absolutely.
excited about.
Yeah, and we'll hopefully also be talking to other local designers as well.
Guests, which we
Doing
haven't
getting
done
some
on here,
guests.
but I'm
Yep,
excited about that too.
do some interviews, and just keep spreading the community and getting people making games.
Because I want this to be a platform where it's not only we are helping spotlight our tiny, tiny community, realistically,
Yep,
and because we've name dropped a lot of people that we've just like physically met, right? But like amplifying these people and talking about the impact of them in our lives, I think is really important. Um, and because it does kind of show the impact that networking can have on you and your career, and how it
Mm.
helps you consider different things and change your perspective on stuff. But also show how no matter how infinitely professional or successful that you think I might be because I am helping run this event or I have published games or I don't know whatever I'm doing because I don't believe it personally, but that I belong in this space, and you, the person who's just gone, maybe I should make a board game. I don't know, that might be really hard. Just as much belongs in this space. I mean, if you want to talk about hit rate, you're probably doing better than I am with nothing released compared to I just
Yeah,
kind of shit the bed on repeat these days. And I just think that I really want to make it feel like a place where literally anyone can do what I'm doing, and try and make it as transparent as possible. And I think this new evolution of the podcast is going to be a lot more exciting and being able to do that.
indeed.
But that is our time. So hopefully we'll be seeing you in, I want to say the next episode, but it's just hopefully we'll be seeing you on From Scratch to Shelf.
Yep,
Yeah,
on our new show.
on our new show. Once again, I am Keith Franks of Cutlass Board Games. This is Steve Dee of Tin Star Games. And keep making games. Just keep doing it.
Yep, great advice.